Good morning. My name is Brian Winters, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. The committee secretary has confirmed that we now have quorum, so I will call meeting 13 of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. This meeting is being held using the city's WebEx technology, with members and staff connecting by video conference or by calling in. Because we are meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delays and any technical issues. We have 5 registered public speakers today. The public can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I would like to remind all staff and presenters to keep their mic muted with their video turned off unless they need to address the committee. This will make it easier for the co-chairs and those watching along on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate and vote on each item. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and ensure that your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, we will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or speak. We will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that although you are participating remotely, you must still submit your motions in writing to the committee secretary. The clerk's staff are available by email at ecdc@toronto.ca to help with motions. To start off the meeting in the right way, we will now have the offering by Selena Young, Director, Indigenous Affairs Office, to be followed by an opening blessing by Francis Sanderson. Selena, when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. I have sage I'm about to light. And if this is your practice, if you have your bundle with you, please join me in offering medicines. And you can also, I encourage you to think about the amazing properties and teachings you've received about sage and wash that medicine over you to help start us in a good way with clear minds and heart. I will leave the medicines burning with us throughout the meeting and the conversations. Merci.
Miigwech, Selena. Ani, Sego, Hueche, Tansi, good morning. Pagujinginikweji Jactodem, Wawaskinagan Dunjaba. My name is Francis Sanderson. I'm from a small reserve, Whitefish River First Nation, and I'm a member of the Crane clan. We call on the Creator. We ask him to watch over us, to guide us, to guide our meeting today. But more importantly, we ask him to help us to deal with the issues at hand in a good and kind way. Selena has graciously offered a smudge this morning. And it's important to remember that starts our meetings, that brings us together. The first plant given to us by the Creator was tobacco, and it's the most powerful, followed by sage, cedar, and sweetgrass. The tobacco comes to us from the eastern direction, the sage from the west, the sweetgrass from the south, and the cedar from the north. The tobacco teaches us about honesty between people or in circles or speaking to the Creator. The tobacco travels ahead of the words to ensure honesty. Sage is used to release troubles and remove negative energies. It's a cleanser and helps us to keep our minds free. Cedar is to purify the home, the area where we're sitting. It's a form of protection and helps us to speak freely and clearly to each other. And sweetgrass is the hair of Mother Earth. It's the kindness and reminds people of the gentle mother's kindness. It's a calming, effective way to set the mood for our meetings. Creator, we ask you to bring all those medicines and give us the ability to sit together today in this virtual circle and decide things in a good way that are going to affect the people that are in our community, the people that are under our protection of our organizations, and also reminds us to deal with the City of Toronto and guide them with our advice and with our knowledge in dealing with the Indigenous community. Creator, we ask you to help us to think in a good way, see in a good way, listen carefully, and speak with respect. But most of all, we ask you to help us to do this with passion, not without debate, but with passion for goodness, for the betterment of all. So, Creator, thank you, Miigwech, for this day and all the gifts that you've given us, and help us to have a good, kind, wholesome, respectful meeting. So all these things we say Miigwech, Miigwech, Miigwech.
Thank you, Selena and Francis. And Francis, especially, thank you for reminding us of the importance of those teachings and bringing forward our minds in the right way. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee acknowledges the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Seeing none, may I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting on June 18, 2021 and June 28, 2021? Suzanne? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Please raise your hand. The motion carries. The first item is item AA13.1, Indigenous Affairs Office Update. I understand that Selena Young, Director, Indigenous Affairs Office, will give us an update to the committee. Go ahead when you're ready, Selena.
I want to start by acknowledging the incredible community support for Indigenous communities who had to fires. I cannot begin to imagine how terribly difficult that was for those that were evacuated. For community members that came here to Mississauga, there was a lot of small children and elders, and it was so heartening, and I'm so grateful to the organizations who stepped forward to support. There were so many. I'm going to name a few that I know provided exceptional supports. That included Toronto Council Fire, Bannock, Anishinaabe Health, Native Women's, Native Child, and I know the Indigenous Network here in Peel also provided quite a bit of support. So many individuals found ways to help, and the power of community and Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks coming together was deeply moving. So for all of you involved and those that I haven't mentioned, I just wanted to extend my sincerest gratitude in Eskimo. When it comes to the Indigenous Affairs Office, I'll share a few updates. I do want to give a big shout out to the team at the Indigenous Affairs Office, Jen, Jeff, Jennifer, Ashley, and Diana, for incredible work, always above and beyond, and including pulling together the update that I'm sharing with you today. So I think I've mentioned in the past that the Indigenous Affairs Office is hiring another consultant or senior advisor that will lead the city's response to the calls for justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. That job posting closed last week. I want to thank everyone on the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, lots of community members who shared the post, people that stepped forward. Includes access to water for Indigenous communities, supporting the Indigenous engagement for the Toronto Island Master Plan, as well as the Ravine Strategy, pieces of work that you've heard about here at this committee. We are working internally with planning and corporate real estate to implement the council-approved recommendations that support Thunder Woman Healing Lodge in navigating city processes towards the development of that incredible healing lodge on Kingston Road. These recommendations include acquiring the land conveyance at fair market value, waiving particular fees, charges, and other costs associated with the development, and directing staff to develop a framework for reducing barriers and costs for Indigenous-led developments. While that works, there's specific work focused on supporting Thunder Woman Healing Lodge. We also hope and have council approval to explore how the city can change processes and do things in a different way that may support future Indigenous-led developments like Thunder Woman. So a huge thanks to Patty and her team for helping us open the door to a lot more possibilities. We're working with city divisions on the Reconciliation Action Plan, planning to bring that to this committee in October. That includes strategic and specific actions for divisions across the city of Toronto to take, as well as identifying specific resource needs for the 2022 budget. We are collaborating with the Housing Secretariat and the Toronto Indigenous Community Advisory Board to set up meetings and build a relationship, essentially establishing, for those of you that are familiar with, a meeting in the middle type approach for the Housing Secretariat and the exceptional Indigenous housing providers in Toronto. SDFA, Social Development Finance and Administration, is working on an Indigenous funding framework to bring to this committee in the fall, and the IAO, the Indigenous Affairs Office, is supporting that. I think some of you have been involved. Currently, our colleagues are putting out a call for a leadership group of Indigenous leaders to help guide that process. So if you haven't received any information, please let me know during or after the meeting. Send me an email and I'll make sure you get the information. There's an Indigenous philanthropy event being hosted by colleagues on August 26th. Similarly, if you don't have the information and are interested in attending or learning more, please let me know. And our colleagues in People and Equity are working on an event for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, getting advice from an Indigenous staff team to see what we can do internally. Another huge part of course, I think what drew most of us to the work of the Indigenous Affairs Office is supporting Indigenous organizations and communities. So I'll just share a few things that we've been doing, the office has been involved in. So we're supporting Indigenous community and accessing land and water near the Humber River to continue to hold ceremony and land-based teachings, which have been happening, and we want to make sure continue to happen. Working with urban forestry and other city divisions to identify additional land close to the current lodge to expand the activities and make sure that community has a space to go. We're engaging with land stewards and earthworkers in High Park on how to support their work on the land. There's a lot of different elements of this. I'm happy to talk to folks after the meeting if you're interested in the specifics. Of course, we continue to work with Indigenous leaders and Toronto Public Health to support vaccinations in the continued COVID responses. And last 2 points, we have met with community partners. Many of you are also members of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to discuss encampments and important work that the city needs to consider and do to support Indigenous folks on the land. And we've met with community partners to discuss programs and services needed for our two-spirited brothers and sisters and cousins. And I'm really grateful to Keith and his team for helping us see what can be done and working with us in such a good way. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your ongoing support. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Members, do you have any questions of staff on this item? If so, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let us know. Seeing none, are there any speakers to the item? If you wish to speak, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Hearing no further speakers, do I have a motion to receive the item? I have a motion from Angus Palmer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? The motion carries. The next item is, actually, I'll hand it over to Pam at this point. Thanks.
So the next item is filling vacancies in Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee membership. We'll begin with the registered public speakers on this item before moving it back to the committee. And I believe we have 4 registered speakers. Public speakers will have 5 minutes to make their remarks, which may be followed by questions from committee members. Public speakers are requested to address the committee by audio only. I will ask the committee secretary to confirm that our first public speaker, Tiffany Malley, is ready to proceed. And I would like to remind all public speakers to observe the rules and be respectful in addressing the committee. Your speaking time is 5 minutes, and when you get close to the end, I will let you know. So, clerks, is Tiffany Malley ready to proceed?
Yes, co-chair, our first public speaker is ready to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Tiffany. Welcome to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. Again, you have 5 minutes, and when you're getting close to the end, I will let you know. Please proceed.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. Bonjour, good morning. My spirit name is Woman Who Is As Beautiful as the Fire. I'm Makwa Clan, and I'm a daughter of a 60s scoop survivor. I'm Ojibwe, Mohawk, Mi'kmaq, and have family relations in New Brunswick, Six Nations, Wikwemikong, Chagin, and Sault Ste. Marie. I've been a this for over 14 years in this community. Today is Prisoners' Justice Day. Started in the Canadian prisons in 1974. Prisoners' Justice Day is in support of prisoners' rights and to remember all the people who have died of unnatural deaths while inside. I honor, acknowledge, and pray for our brothers and sisters still inside those walls and that didn't make it out. We care about you. We send prayers, Sema, our loved ones. I would like to take a moment of silence for all of our relations who are still inside today and for those who didn't make it out. I've been attending the Aboriginal Affairs Committee meetings for almost a year now, maybe a little bit more. I've had the opportunity to speak. I've made recommendations that would ensure the community holds a space for us to be involved. I also suggested a community engagement advisory committee be implemented that would be inclusive for community to engage and work collaboratively with the IAO, the TASAC, and this committee. Sadly, that hasn't happened yet. A couple meetings ago, Andrea made a motion, which was seconded by Francis Sanderson, states that 4 of the current 8 vacant seats would be given to Miguel, Catherine, and myself. On the 24th, there was a scheduled special meeting held about this item. None of the 4 of us were no meeting, which was subsequently canceled. There was another special meeting, which was held on June 28th. There was less than 5% of this committee present. I'm told by Jonathan that the motion Andrea put forth was voted down, which doesn't make any sense. At the July 6th Executive Committee meeting, there was an item which was submitted in reference to this item. The motion from the Executive Committee referred the item back to the for further reconsideration. You know, I would like to be a member of this committee. There's 8 vacant seats, and I've been one of the committed members who've been here. I acknowledge that there's been committee members that haven't even been here for the entire time that I've things, and I'm actually very, very committed to one of these seats. I come with a vast amount of knowledge, lived experience, and I feel that I am a good asset to the Aboriginal Affairs Committee. I have volunteered countless amount of hours advocating for children and youth, homelessness, mental health, housing, and I've also been working collaboratively with many other community members who are feeling as if these systems, they're not self-determined. I'm also reminded that many committee members have stated in the past that the Aboriginal Affairs Committee does things their own way. Now, I'm currently looking at the document today that is being presented in the agenda item. This states that only 2 communities hold the seats. This does not reflect the most. If there is 25 seats, I feel there should be more seats allocated for community representation within the committee. I'm also being mindful that Andrew is not here today. I'm very concerned as this your committee has consistently been to every single meeting. I'm concerned that she's not here today to speak to the item, and I'm wondering if it had to do with the last meeting, which turned out really terribly. We were silenced, and process was not proper. I would like to also point out that throughout the COVID pandemic, Miguel, Catherine, and I have been consistently attending the committee meetings. I also completed and submitted a formal application through the City of Toronto website, signing up for a seat. I was surprised when Miguel informed me that he also submitted applications. Ask a commitment from the committee, state Andrew's motion, or can someone please make another motion that will include that Miguel, Patty, Catherine, and I will have a seat on the committee effective immediately. I appreciate your time, and I want to acknowledge the Prisoners' Justice Day and everything that the grassroots people have been doing. We say miigwech.
Thank you,
Naha.
Tiffany. Thank you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts today. Members, are there any questions for the public speaker? Please unmute or raise your hand. I can't see everyone. Seeing and hearing none, I will confirm with the clerks that our second speaker, Miguel, is ready to proceed.
Madam Chair,
Yes, good morning.
he's ready to proceed. Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, welcome.
Yeah,
You'll have 5 minutes to speak. I'll give you a note when you're coming to your time.
all right, thank you. So we are back after being the only speaker on July 26th I believe, was the meeting of the executive committee. And my sister, Tiffany, tried to be a participant, and the city clerk gave her the best opportunities, but there were some technical issues. I want to acknowledge that part. So the mayor looked at me in my face and says, "What is wrong with the Aboriginal Affairs Committee? Why do they want us to choose who is going to sit at your committee? Isn't it true that we do things differently at the Aboriginal Affairs?" Just reiterating what Tiffany has said so far. So Tiffany's right. We have also a problem with this committee about quorum. Many times I have attended this meeting at City Hall, and you guys didn't do much because there was no quorum. For the record, I have been attending this committee since 2010. I have submitted documentation showing to you that since 2010, I have applied to this committee 4 times. And I have a letter from the Civic Appointments Committee acknowledging that I have posted an application, but I never have an opportunity to be interviewed. Nobody calls me to say, "Miguel, would like to give you a chance. I think you look Aboriginal. Let's give us a chance. Why don't you give us a chance to Tiffany, to Catherine, to Patty, to become part of this group, because we have shown really sincere, honest effort to be participants." My contribution is as follows. I am currently the tenant rep for my building at 220 Oak Street, TCSG building. We achieved $30 million for the tower renewal of my building. That's going to give us 5-year work and opportunities of employment. Secondly, I am a member of the Regent Park Neighborhood Association. You guys know about Regent Park, don't you? You know the success of Regent Park. I'm also a member of the Regent Park Coalition for Community Benefits. We achieved in 2020 $26.8 million for the community benefits agreement that would allow us to do many positive things for our community. And I want to fight to ensure that Indigenous people have access to 10% of housing. And that has always been the call from these members of the community. Please give us 10%. And I spoke with Ana Bailao. She came to the Sacred Fire camp at Dufferin Grove. And I told her, we need to have a standard policy that covers all the new developments in downtown Toronto, namely the new condominiums. You know, inclusionary zoning has been the longest battle at City Hall. And every time it gets moved forward, it gets defeated because of other lobbyist groups that are connected to the developers. We as an Aboriginal group, we can be the voice of that community that is voiceless as City Council. We can be ensured that we can succeed in achieving 10% of social housing in the city of Toronto. I have submitted my deputation in writing. I know. Yes, I need to wrap it up. Thanks very much. Again, this is your call. The ball is in your field today. You have to make that decision what is best for the city. And don't be afraid to make change. We just not just regular activists or protesters. I think the mayor called me the other day at City Council, a protester. I'm not a protester after being arrested at Trinity Baldwin Park for protecting a sacred fire. Me and my girlfriend were both arrested. And then at Lamprey Stadium, I was maced with pepper spray. Why? Because the truth is we don't have a social housing plan in this city. That's the reason why people are sleeping in tents, in parks, and campings. We need to make some justice for these people, and we need to urge politicians to build social housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks and joining us today. Members, do we have any questions for the public speaker? And can we please mute Miguel because it's giving me feedback? Thank you. Questions, please unmute or raise your hand and go ahead. Seeing and hearing none, I will confirm that our next public speaker, Catherine Gandy, is ready to proceed. Clerks?
Madam Chair, I believe Catherine Gandy is not on the call.
Okay,
We can
thank
proceed
you. So
with the next speaker.
Okay, so confirming that Patty Pettigrew is ready to proceed.
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, Patty. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Francis, thank you for that lovely prayer. So Thunder Woman Healing Lodge Society is here to ask to fill one of the vacant seats. I think that you all pretty well know who Thunder Woman is. And in this last year, we've just been barreling ahead, and I'm really excited to announce that on September 7th, which is the new moon, we'll be doing our groundbreaking ceremony. And I just, my heart is just full on this one. I'm so pleased about this. And we couldn't have done this without the support of the community, right back to the days, Pam, you'll remember when we were shaking our tin cans at Union Station asking for donations. Up to today, the support of the community has been amazing. The support of the city has also, and I'm going to say this to my surprise, has also been overwhelming. The support of the Indigenous Affairs Office, and then earlier on, when Council Fire and Native Child and Family Services put up a guarantor as guarantors. So we've had a number of really significant supports. We are currently have quite an expanded program, and I don't know, I may have to put the brakes on it at some point, but I'm still looking forward to taking over the world. We have our outreach program, which, as you know, is giving out backpacks with PPE and personal hygiene products. We took about 100 backpacks to the evacuees. We have housed since November 50 women with children. We have a housing worker. We have 2 outreach workers. And we have in our house, which is our temporary location, we've had our first 2 graduates from our program. And we have contracts now with the Ministry of the Attorney General, Indigenous Justice Division, for bail beds. So we're the first of our kind in Ontario for women, for Indigenous women. And we have contracts with SolGen for probation beds. And we are now going to be getting our first federal correctional inmate coming to Thunder Woman. So I'm really proud of how quickly we've moved along, but I really recognize that we could not have done this without the community. And to all of the community and to all of the organizations and to TASK, I just say a heartfelt miigwech. I think that, you know, in working with the city and the Indigenous Affairs Office, we have all learned quite a bit. And I was really encouraged when the city agreed to look at how Indigenous organizations are treated when we're trying to open our organizations or acquire land. For instance, they wanted to take 1.5 meters back from us of the land that we purchased. And normally you don't have a say in that. Well, we fought that, and we presented really good reasoning why they shouldn't do that. And so they have agreed to pay us fair market value for that piece of land. And I was quite clear that if we're going to sell it to them, we have to. We're not going to be taking beads or trinkets for it. So that's where we're at. And I would be quite grateful to get a seat. And also, I just want to mention, I got 15 minutes. I've been meeting with the walkers coming across Canada. And on the 27th, the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, my nation, will be walking from the Mush Hole to Toronto in honor of Joey Commanda, who was one of our community members who died running away from the Mush Hole. So if anybody, I'm encouraging anyone to join us. It's a 2-day walk. Regret.
Thank you, Patty, and congratulations on all the hard work with Thunder Women's and your groundbreaking ceremony. I'm so excited and so proud to hear the immense progress that the project has made. Any questions or comments for the public speaker? Please unmute and proceed. All right, seeing none, that is the end of our speakers, our public speakers on this item. We just wanted to sort of address the motion that's being presented today and address that the committee has never had the privilege to be able to appoint members, and that our terms of reference actually speak against this, and that there needs to be a fair and open and equitable process for all agencies and such to be able to apply and to go through a fair process equally. And so I just want to see if there are any speakers on this item. If you wish to speak and address this, please raise your hand, unmute, and let us know. And if seeing none and hearing none, if the clerks can then put up the motion. Clerks.
Hi, co-chairs. Just give us 1 second, please.
Thank you so much.
City Clerk, can you confirm if you still have quorum?
Francis, please go ahead.
Yeah, just while we have a couple of seconds, I would like to congratulate Patty as well on a gold medal job, just like our women did in the Olympics. Patty is our Olympic gold medalist. You've done an excellent job, Patty, and brought this from conception right through to now your groundbreaking ceremony coming up in early September. So just want you to know you've done an excellent job.
And just per the question, can we confirm that we still have quorum? I believe we do.
Madam Chair, yes, we do have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the motion should have been shared out, but happy to read it out loud if any of the members feel that to be helpful for you. If yes, please unmute and say yes. Hearing no yeses, we will be voting on the motion as presented on the screen.
Hold on, I can't see that. Thank you. Can we scroll back up to the top? I didn't see the top portion. Thank you.
And can we scroll slowly down to the bottom, like really slowly? Please stop moving it.
Actually, can it be read aloud? I think that might be.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay,
Just
let's go to the top.
Easier with the scrolling.
For sure. Okay, so the motion is that the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee amend the recommendations from the Director, Indigenous Affairs Office, so they now read as follows. That the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee recommend to the Executive Committee that 1, City Council amend the terms of reference of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee to provide public members are to be members of Aboriginal organizations and the community at large. So that section B1 and 2 of the terms of reference read as follows. B, composition and term. The advisory committee is composed of 25 members with 1 member of City Council, with the exception of the member of City Council. Aboriginal Advisory Committee members are representatives of Aboriginal organizations and of the community at large. 2, members are appointed by City Council on recommendation of the Civic Appointments Committee for Public Members and Striking Committee for the member of City Council. 2, City Council requests the Director, Indigenous Affairs Office, in consultation with the co-chairs of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, to recruit members in order to fill all existing vacancies on the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee as soon as practicable. 3, the Executive Committee requests the City Clerk, in consultation with the IAO and the City Manager's Office, to report to the first meeting in 2022 of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee on options for a revised public appointments process for the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee for the 2022 to 2026 council term. And that is the end. So we are putting this motion to a vote. And so I am looking for all those in favor, raise your hand.
You changed the terms of reference to remove the community members. You read it and it's crossed.
No,
And any opposed?
They're pushing to 2022. That's not doing things.
Help us understand. Let the community understand why the 2 community members were crossed out yesterday.
Can we please mute the public speakers, clerk?
I just understanding what type of lateral violence this is.
Yeah.
Please mute the public speakers.
You crossed out the 2 community members.
So I would like to be respectful.
That was included.
Okay. Tiffany, I'm going to address your comment, although that you've already had your time to speak and that you typically wouldn't have an opportunity to ask questions of the members, but I want to respect you and your time.
Usually
and address
the motion
and address what you are saying. So
the agenda item is
keep the speakers muted. So we did remove the 2 community members to open it up to have more than 2 communities at large. So I will again ask any opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. And we will move on to the next item, which is 13.3, Indigenous Heritage Engagement Project.
Madam Chair.
I'll pass it over to Brian. Yes, sorry.
I believe there's another motion. The first one it was shown was motion A. I think there's another one, motion B.
My apologies. Can we put that on the screen, please?
Give us a second here,
No worries.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will read this one out loud again for everyone. So the motion is that the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee recommend to the Executive Committee that one, City Council request the Director, Indigenous Affairs Office to invite the register presenters on item AA13.2 to apply for positions on the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee in a process open to the community at large, and to alert all members of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee once the recruitment process is open for public applications to help ensure Indigenous community members' representatives are aware of this opportunity, and that that's okay.
So the motions have been adopted. There's another motion just to amend the item, adopt the item as amended.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, motion carries.
Thanks, Pam. So the next item is item AA13.3, Indigenous Heritage Engagement Project. Planning staff have requested that this item be deferred to the October meeting of the committee. Unless anyone wishes to speak to the item, I will move to deferral. Can the clerk staff please display the motion on the screen?
Give us a second, Mr. Chair.
So the motion on the table is that consideration of the item be deferred until the October 5, 2021 meeting of the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed, please raise your hand. The motion carries. The next item is item AA13.4, Toronto Zoo request for support. I understand that Dolph de Jong, Chief Executive Officer, Toronto Zoo, will give a presentation to the committee. Can you hear us?
Good morning. How are you today?
Good. Thank you, Mr. de Jong. Go ahead when you're ready.
To the committee, first of all, thank you so much for hosting us this morning and taking a few minutes of your valuable time for this discussion. We're here today to request some feedback about a few initiatives that we're working on at your Toronto Zoo. Next slide, please. So specifically, before I get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing that you may or may not be aware of at your zoo. Then get into the two key elements that drove things, our 2022 strategic plan and the initiatives that came out of that. And specifically, that is new Indigenous advisor role and our current master plan, which we're under the development of. Next slide, please. So you may or may not be aware that our zoo has been working with communities across the province for years, and particularly with Indigenous communities. This is through our Turtle Island Conservation Program. And this program has 4 key objectives. They are to increase the understanding and appreciation of the diversity of First Nations culture and ways of knowing amongst all people. The second is to promote and acknowledge the connections between traditional ways of knowing and Western science. The third is to facilitate intergenerational knowledge sharing through the creation of educational resources and community-centered conservation projects. And the final piece is to promote environmental science and scientific monitoring in First Nations communities. Next slide, please. So we're currently active in communities across the province, as you can see from this map and the list on the right-hand side. One of the key elements of this is actually the raising, training, and releasing of native turtle species. And as many of us are aware, native turtle species in Ontario all of them are now listed as vulnerable, threatened, or endangered. They're very much struggling out there in the natural world. Next slide, please. So for us, this conservation action, some examples of it. We work closely with Misway Beak trainees, and they're delivering the Turtle Island Conservation Program, key advocates and connection points to our communities, to those communities, sorry. The Blandings Turtle Head Starting Program, this is the yellow-chinned turtle that 10 years ago, we counted 7 of them in the Rouge Valley. In the past 7 years, we've released around 500 of those animals to help reestablish wild populations. We do that every year on National Indigenous Peoples Day. And as part of that, we do bring in elders to help send these turtles on their way in the right way. And this is a really key and wonderful moment for these animals as they're sent out into the natural world. We also do this work for endangered wood turtles, which are really struggling and numbers are diminishing. Next slide, please. For those of you who've been to the zoo site recently, you'll be aware of some of the programs and facilities we have. We have the Traditional Knowledge Trail and a First Nations Art Garden, and they talk about and deliver a visual narrative of Mohawk and Ojibwe creation stories. We talk about traditional knowledge and culturally significant connections to animals and plants and the significance to the people of Turtle Island. And right now, if you were actually to visit our front entranceway, we have banners and interpretive signage on the bridge into the zoo, recognizing the tragic losses that took place in the residential schools. So there is some programming going on at your zoo, but in no way do we feel it's enough or as reflective as it should be. Next slide, please. So a few years ago, we started a new strategic plan. And one of the items highlighted when we wrote that program was we needed better connections to Indigenous communities. Next slide, please. That plan talked about your zoo's mission, which a lot of people don't realize is connecting people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. You know, we're dreaming of a world where wildlife and wild spaces are thriving. And I think it's one of those pieces that all of us would agree on quite passionately. Next slide. The process involved online consultation, community meetings, but I didn't actually come to this committee. And that was an oversight on my part. And we're looking to improve on that. And that's part of what we're here today to do is build these connections. So with that plan, we came up with our kind of 5 key priorities: saving wildlife, igniting the passion of our staff and volunteers, creating WOW that's making memories and connections that last a lifetime to help get people engaged. Our community in our zoo, this is Toronto's zoo, and we want to take meaningful steps to better support and reflect this community. And finally, to revolutionize zoo technology. I think it's easy to get excited about the work going on in Toronto, at Mars, and those types of places, and we'd like to apply that at your zoo. Next slide, please. And this plan is based on 4 simple values. And we talk about our One Toronto Zoo caring. That starts with the animals. They're our sacred duty. Extends to our staff and volunteers. Of course, our guests as our agents of change that go into the world. And of course, that broader community. Next slide, please. So 3 weeks after this plan was released, COVID happened. So that has resulted in some dramatic and challenging times for all of us. For us, the zoo was closed for several months. Next slide, please. But we continued to focus on caring for our animals, on delivering endangered species and raising, rearing, and releasing them, because we know a lot of these animals are so critically endangered, we can't take a year off. And that message certainly has been reinforced over the past few days when we look at the International Panel on Climate Change and their report on the state of climate and how that's going to affect biodiversity and animals. Next slide, please. So we're very early in our journey as far as doing a better job connecting with Indigenous communities, better reflecting their wants and needs, and have been having some really fantastic and wonderful candid conversations about steps we need to take to get there. And some of those steps have happened even during the pandemic. We updated our tripartite agreement. And one of the key elements that we put in there was making sure traditional land uses were included in spaces where we could do a better job sharing that real estate and providing more opportunities and venues if the community so desired. Next slide, please. As far as actually making some more meaningful changes, in the fall of 2000, we established an additional full-time Indigenous advisor role at the zoo. And we believe it would be incredible to have the guidance of somebody Indigenous for our future direction. So that has meant we've had to step back, start rethinking our processes, looking at what that role does, what is the right process to get the appropriate candidate. So that's part of what we're here today to talk about, and we're seeking your feedback on. I had the opportunity to come to your last meeting, and it was incredibly helpful for me to even hear the narrative. Since that time, we've worked with a lot of community partners and started seeking community feedback, and it's changed our direction already a little bit, as we've heard with folks to say, you know what, traditional knowledge and conservation science in themselves are a critical role. And that is separate than a human resources connected equity, diversity, and inclusion type role. And the zoo needs to reflect that. It's also highlighted the need and value of advisory circles, of broader groups of people to help us get our trajectory correct. Next slide, please. And the other piece we're working on that we want to make sure we get right, and the pandemic's forced us to look in the mirror about where we're heading, is in our master plan. And we've done initial consultation online, with online surveys and with some virtual connections. We're really grateful for the Indigenous Affairs Office of the City of Toronto for circulating links, but we know a lot more to do. So we wanted to seek your advice on how to connect with the Indigenous community, what good consultation could look like to make sure that this plan that we're coming up with is suitable, is heading in the right direction. Next slide, please. So that's a very quick background. And again, we're here today seeking your perspectives and advice as far as on what an Indigenous advisory role at the senior level at our zoo should look like, and any suggestions as far as improving our consultation with the draft master plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeJong. And also thank you for populating your presentation with so many adorable pictures. It's a great way to kind of continue the morning. Members, do you have any questions of the presenter on this item? If so, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Hi, Ruth, go ahead.
There you go. I agree. I had my little one standing just off camera watching all the photos. They want to be a vet and have, expressed want to work for the zoo. So they're 8, so it's a while for them to move into that position. My question is, when you're looking at this senior advisor role, what sort of theoretical space do you want them to come from? Yes, you're looking for an Indigenous person. Are you looking for somebody who has the land teachings, the animal teachings, or are you also looking for somebody who has done a mix of Western and Indigenous learning with a science-based program? So, I should also identify, I'm the professor type. I'm from York University. I teach at York University. And so I'm also wanting to ensure that we are supporting the movement forward of Indigenous education spaces. So is there any way that it could be, we could be looking at somebody who may need support through their education to build into a position like this?
Yes, thank you for that. An absolutely enormous question, and actually put your finger on the pulse of what we've been wrestling with. I think we started this discussion probably from the wrong spot internally, kind of looking at representation. And then as we continue to talk to people and make connections, the piece that just keeps coming out is how, when it comes to fighting extinction and conservation and thinking 7 generations from now, a lot of the best work happens when we bring traditional knowledge and Western science together. So you know, I think when you talk about starting from a habitat perspective or an animal perspective, you know, I think there's a lot of room to talk about what the best way to go is. Animals won't survive in the wild without great places to live. People and conservation initiatives disproportionately connect to individual animals as far as catalyzing movement. So I think that's part of why we're here is to have those discussions and help us come up with the best answer to that. We know it involves communication of traditional knowledge and conservation science. We know it has to get back to those original teachings, but a lot of room, to be honest with you.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Thank you. I was just wondering if it was because conservation, all those other spaces would be also grounded in education-based facilities. Have you engaged with some of the alumni that have gone through those programs of Indigenous identity, not just heritage, but identity, right? And so how they may want to be brought in, because we may be Indigenous and we may all be, you know, very strongly grounded, but we may not have the connections and the responsibilities to that the territories and the lands in the same way, as many of us are caring for community through our people, right? Not that they are not interrelated and interconnected. I just feel like maybe turning to the spaces where people are learning how to do that conservation, who have taken up that responsibility, who is in Haudenosaunee, you know, understanding, they would have put that in their basket. I think that, you know, engaging with the education spaces to demonstrate that Indigenous people are achieving excellence in our knowledge, in walking in both worlds. Just a thought. So I'm going to put that in a very direct, pragmatic way. Have you gone to the universities and the programs where people have been graduating from and tried to support, scaffold people into developing, going to masters, finishing degrees, and doing that sort of space?
Yes, thank you. So the short answer to that is we've met with the Indigenous Affairs offices of University of Toronto Scarborough, Centennial College, Durham College, you know, great academic partners. So that is absolutely, along with the Indigenous Affairs Office of the City of Toronto, the places we started where we saw folks with a framework. Quite frankly, none of those frameworks fit for your zoo because we're all of those things and none of those things. And we have not, to your point, actually made the next connection, which is ideally finding those incredible students, potentially student graduates, if those are going to be the best candidates for this kind of role. And I think that's kind of where I'll you know, I don't want to be flippant, but a little chicken and egg. You know, we want to talk to a lot of folks. At the same time, we want to honor a process and make sure we can, you know, get the right people in the process without them having the optics that they've steered it on their own.
Thank you. And I believe Francis had a question and then Angus as well. Francis, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. De Jong, have you built on the Indigenous input and collaboration that started 10 years ago with a committee at the Toronto Zoo? I guess it was under the leadership of Cal White, when there was an Indigenous council attached to the zoo, whereby they named the animals, the signage of the native plants, the northern walkway that was created. Are you building on that, or are you reinventing the wheel is what I'm asking you, because there was quite a robust program that had started at the zoo a number of years ago.
Well, it sounds to me, based on your question, that I am reinventing the wheel. I'm actually not familiar with that council, so that's great direction for me to go pursue.
Thank you. Pursue it.
Angus, when you're ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think Francis's point is an important one, because there really is like a tendency to start initiatives and then drop them, and then forget about them, and then start again, drop them. I mean, we talk a lot about sustainability, but sustainability isn't just sustainability in an environmental sense. Sustainability has to be in the context of memory, of institutional memory, of institutional consistency. And so, yeah, I mean, I wasn't familiar with what Francis has spoken of, and it sounds like you're not either. And so it's kind of sad in a sense, really. We launch these initiatives and then we just forget about them. I think in the context of hiring the person or persons that you're referring to, this made a good point. I think it's really important to know what it is that you're looking for. What are the qualities of the person, the background, the credentials, the world experience. I think it's good for you to understand that before you go out to find people. Like it helps if the zoo could come to grips with that. And I would say that that when you've got that understanding and you're able to express it, I think it's really important to go out to the Indigenous groups in the city of Toronto and give them lots of lead time. I mean, I work with WAMN, which is an Indigenous housing provider. It's not that I have any reason to believe necessarily that any of the clients that we serve would be qualified, but I don't know. But what I do know is that if we have the opportunity to share that information with people, I mean, we're encouraged to share that information with people, then we will do so. And the more that is shared with the community, the better the chance is of turning up applicants who meet what you will have already, come to understand you want, right? Which is what I'm saying you've got to do. So those are my, not terribly revolutionary insights. But I just wanted to, since you're here, I've been a member, if there's a membership is the word. Have we lost the gentleman? I think we have.
Here.
Oh, you're still there. Okay, great. So I've been a member of the Toronto Zoo for going on 21, 22 years now, and been going to the zoo, regularly. I've actually got to go pick up my membership, which I renewed in the little membership office there. And just before COVID hit, I went to Terra Lumina, and I'm interested in knowing, how the zoo has done. If you can share with us, I mean, I'm bearing in mind that COVID hit. I mean, are you making money on that? And also because there's a whole sort of I don't know, spiritual worldview that's presented in that. And I'm interested in knowing if you can share with us what research was done, what was done to ground what was presented in Terra Lumina in I don't know, Indigenous teachings and Indigenous worldview, anything at all, like, or is it just kind of, did you lose money on it? And is it just kind of fluff? I went to it. So I'm just kind of curious on how you did on that. If you can share that with us.
So trying to be as concise as possible, we were really excited about the results and what was coming in with Terra Lumina before COVID pulled the rug out. Well over $1 million in revenue in the first few months of operations. And we're pleased that it's now relaunched and we're offering it 4 days a week, and it will continue at the zoo for the next 2-3 years. So that was meant to be, a 3 to 5 year initiative. And quite frankly, we've run it for about 4.5 months. But we are liking the direction, great reception. The past weekend, it was never meant to be a summer piece, but literally 600-700 people a night coming out. So we are pleased with the reception that it's getting. And a very, very candid comment, certainly from you. The suggestion of it being fluff. No, our team was really deliberate. We have our First Nations staff, Taylor in particular, who played a lead role as a connection point between the folks who did the presentation and the Indigenous artists who have actually completed that work and are recognized for it. And I can actually sort of send you some signage that we have at the beginning and the end that talks about that consultation process, because we're becoming increasingly mindful, and we have a lot of work to do, whether it's things like Asian carp and animal names or other elements like that. We have a lot of work to do to keep getting better at this. But we can send you that reference material as well.
Yeah, okay. Like I said, I went to it just before COVID hit, so it's been over a year and a half, and there may well have been signage at the front and signage at the end, which I didn't see. But I'm glad to hear that a sustained effort has been made to ground it in real teachings. I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Jeff, you have a question?
Meeting myself. More of a comment, really. I just want to thank Mr. De Jong for coming to the committee to share this work. I mean, I spent way too much time on Twitter over the weekend. It was wild to see all of the stuff that's coming out about where we are in terms of the climate crisis and lots of stuff going on around our continued path to reconciliation. And then I just think, I should identify myself. I'm the Executive Director at Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. And when I think about the work that we are doing to support community and the ongoing recognition of the connection between green space and wellness, particularly as we come out of this pandemic, I think there's a lot of opportunities at the Toronto Zoo for us to work together, the Indigenous community, the non-Indigenous community, the City of Toronto, to continue to identify pathways to achieve numerous things. One, providing opportunities for our vulnerable, or at risk, or whatever terminology you'd like to use, folks in the city that are struggling with mental health and other challenges as we come out of this pandemic, ways to create land-based programming that bring them to the zoo to directly address those. And there's a canon of research that demonstrates we can do that in very evidence-based ways. I think as you continue to elaborate your relationships with the Indigenous community and, identify, the buckets and the skill sets and the objectives that you'd like one or multiple staff to accomplish, there's also real opportunities for learning that's based in reconciliation and ways that we bring Indigenous knowledge around, addressing climate and conservation into the real world. And I think that's a really important part of learning and development. We focus on kids at Native Child. And when I think about the sort of knowledge that we want our young ones to grow up with so that they can walk in a good way and be in right relations with the world, whether they're Indigenous or not, I think the zoo is an amazing place to do that. So I just think that I'm hoping that we can move forward in conversations, including Native Child and many other organizations, to really understand how we can support the zoo in creating some of that programming and connecting Indigenous kids and youth to the zoo to be able, and then bringing non-Indigenous folks there to learn about Indigenous stuff. I mean, it is so clear that there is still so much learning to do for our allies and other non-Indigenous folk in Canada about not only Indigenous history, but all the innovation that Indigenous culture and approaches bring and how that can be applied to the world today. In not only making Toronto a more sustainable city, but in caring for the world in ways that are going to be really critical as our young ones grow up. And so I just want to thank you for coming to start this conversation and let you know that I hope that I can be a part of it and look forward to supporting the work as it moves forward. Miigwech.
Thank you. And when you talk about Indigenous knowledge and innovation, it's tough not to reference the article in the Toronto Star around forestry management and fires and traditional practices is another great example. And we're going to talk about protecting biodiversity and animals and those natural connections. So yeah, thank you for that.
And I do have to apologize. We did have a public speaker to this item. I'm operating from yesterday's script, not this morning's script. So I will ask that the committee secretary confirm that our first public speaker, Miguel Velarde, is ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe Mr. Velarde is still on the call.
Miguel?
Hi, I'm muting myself.
Okay, you have 5 minutes to speak. When you're getting close to the end of your time, I'll let you know. Please go ahead.
All right. So in 2006, former David Miller, Debbie Miller, encouraged city divisions to hire members from the diverse community of the city of Toronto. I applied for the zoo and I got a job at the zoo as an Aboriginal person. And I also ran for the leadership of the union QP Local 1600. I was one of the shop stewards. At the time, the Toronto Zoo was facing a lot of criticism in the media with regards to Kyle White and Giorgio Mamalotti spending taxpayers' money and jet lags to, trips to China to convince the Chinese government to bring the pandas. We tried to tell you that this was going to be a money-losing operation. At the end of the journey of the pandas in Canada, you were $6 million on the red. So you were in debt for the city. Why? Because you didn't listen to common sense that we would try to tell you when we told Kyle White and the members of the board at the time to incorporate an advisory group, just like this one of the Aboriginal Affairs. These Aboriginal Affairs have been very successful in the past. Through this committee, we convinced the city mayor at the time, Rob Ford, to incorporate the land acknowledgement. We also incorporated flags that are flying now at Nathan Phillips Square. So we have done a lot of positive work. This committee has been able to influence the city. Imagine if the Toronto Zoo back in 2009 could achieve the same potential of victory, such as we told you to move the entrance of the zoo to the America Pavilion. What do you call it? Sorry, not the American Pavilion, but the so-called Canadian domain to showcase indigenous wildlife. And you try not to tell us that you're going to have someone to tell us what is good for the community, indigenous. But we told you before this is before your time, Dolph. It's nothing personal, okay? I just want to give you a history, what has happened in the last almost 11 years. Because as I mentioned before, I was an employee, member of the QP, but I lost my job. And one of the reasons I lost my job is because I was told to remove from the social media that I was pushing for reforms to make more accountable the Toronto Zoo, because it's just another arm of the city of Toronto. And imagine the success that we have had in the 10 years. I was able to convince the board when John Tracona, the former CEO, to allow to have the minutes of your board in your website. That was one of the accomplishments that I took hard, because I wanted to ensure that the minutes are in the city in your website, as well as we remove the elephants from your collection, because we knew it was horrible to maintain a herd of elephants in a very small enclosure. So again, Dijon, you were asking us for advice. I gave you already that advice, but you choose to fire me, terminate my employment, because I was making sure that positive changes, which I was trying to push forward at the Toronto Zoo. And remember, I was just a token in employment. Mostly of my co-workers were white at the time. I was one of the few ones who looked brown and proud. So again, it's a little bit too late. Imagine if you could have applied for the station, for an LRT, for a sideway to go directly to the zoo. You could increase your revenue. And today, all you're doing right now is to raise funds for the zoo. Thank you, John, for coming. That's my deputation for today.
Thank you for your remarks, Miguel. Members, do you have any questions for the public speaker? Seeing none, let me see, where am I here? Give me 1 second. I believe we are going to the point of, are there any speakers to the item? If you wish to speak, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Okay, seeing none. Pam, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sounds good. I think we just need a motion to receive this item and thank our guests for their presentation. So all in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. And thank you so much. Okay, so our next item is the proposed Northwest Cultural Trail. We will begin with the presentation on this item, and then we will hear from the registered public speaker before bringing it back to the committee. We have one public speaker. So I understand that Al Rozowski, sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly, please correct me, who is the manager with Community Planning North York District, and will provide the presentation, and then we will carry on.
Thank you, Pamela.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pamela. And yes, you did pronounce my name correctly. Thank you very much for allowing me to attend your meeting, Bujo. I'm looking forward to explaining to you what the work that we've been doing on the Northwest Cultural Corridor. I have a PowerPoint presentation that has quite a few slides. What I will probably be doing is going through some slides quickly or skipping over even some of the slides. This is something that we've been working on for quite some time in the City of Toronto. I've actually been fortunate to be the planning manager in 3 of the 4 districts of the City of Toronto, so the 3 districts that this proposed trail goes through. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Not as of yet.
Not yet.
Okay, sorry. I may have pulled it up correctly.
We can see your screen, however, it is plain white. There we go. We can now see it. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of our agenda and what I'm trying to accomplish today is I would like to talk a bit about cultural trail precedents in the City of Toronto, the rationale for doing this Northwest Cultural Trail, what the vision is for it, stakeholders that are involved, progress made to date, and talking about some of the next steps that we'll be pursuing in the next couple of months. And then we'll open it for discussion. We have a long history in the City of Toronto doing cultural trails. I have been involved in some of these initiatives as manager of the downtown section of community planning. Some of these are focused on the waterfront or traditional cultural corridors, such as the Yonge Street and Jarvis Street Cultural Corridor. We also address cultural corridors with TO Core and developed cultural precincts and the concept of great streets. So you see some imagery related to that. We have several of these corridors which are under development in a more physical way in terms of streetscape improvements. And working with business improvement areas. So we have the Bloor Street Cultural Corridor and the John Street Cultural Corridor. We have a lot of long distance cultural trails in the City of Toronto. I'm not going to go through the entire list here, but you may be familiar with some of the Indigenous theming that went on with some of these, such as the 80-kilometer long Pan Am Path that was done for 2015. This is the Pan Am Path. You can see a mural that was done in conjunction with that on the right-hand side. It was about physically branding it, but also programming the trail. The mayor was a big supporter of this initiative with the Arts Relay. There is another trail that goes beyond the City of Toronto. It's the 121-kilometer long Lake to Lake Trail, which connects Lake Simcoe down to Lake Ontario. It's the Green Line, and it intersects with a lot of other long distance trails in the GTA. It is a very interesting trail. If you don't know much about it, it follows along a abandoned canal system in southern Ontario. It also has a lot of Indigenous branding along the route. There have been some other announcements that have been made in Toronto. So the 81-kilometer loop trail, which is 69 kilometers of it is built, is being led by Parks, Forestry and Recreation and Evergreen. I'm going to talk briefly about some other cities and their cultural trails. This is probably a gold star example. Downtown Indianapolis started with a cultural trail. It was so successful that it extended into the suburban areas of Indianapolis. It has private sector partnering, and it has a high level of finish in terms of landscaping and pavement materials and public art. There's another example with a lot of Indigenous theming, and that is the Tucson Loop Trail. It's a more regional trail that connects downtown Tucson to the suburban areas. It's a linear outdoor gallery. I'm just going to quickly go over some of these, but the goal is to provide an active transportation. As we got into this, we decided we have a great opportunity to make it a cultural trail, like some of the other long distance trail. It actually parallels the Yonge University line. We know with COVID, a lot of people are trying to do active transportation as opposed to being on transit, connects with a lot of other trails in the city of Toronto, promotes Indigenous Canadian heritage landscape and wayfinding into ravine systems, connects a lot of business improvement areas, colleges and universities. And it also connects 4 neighborhood improvement areas, and these areas have particularly been hard hit by COVID. They are in the northwest portion of the city of Toronto, and they are a lot of our frontline healthcare and food provision service industries. So it implements a lot of City of Toronto plans, including the 10-year bike plan, connects urban farms, which is another interesting aspect of this. Turns some highway infrastructure into more balanced active transportation corridors. It is a cultural corridor because besides the Indigenous communities, it connects other communities such as Black Torontonian communities, so particularly Jane Finch, Lawrence Heights, and Little Jamaica. And it does provide an opportunity for private sector partnership in conformance with the City of Toronto strategic plan. The last point is that it also connects the 2 major growth centers, the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre and the TO Core downtown Toronto. So I'm just going to give you some examples of the rationale for this corridor. Starting with the Indigenous history of the area, the route is shown in purple, and I pulled the Archaeological Services Inc. map, particularly the Parsons site in Black Creek, Downsview area, the Toronto shoreline area, including the tie-in to the Toronto Islands. So this is a significant connecting route for those historical areas. There's quite a bit of branding along this route already. There's the Huron-Wendat Trail, which was up in the Finch Hydro Corridor area. There's also the trail that follows along Davenport, and there are markers along that route. We have been working with neighborhood associations and business improvement areas, and there's marking in terms of the original Indigenous names along several streets along this route. There are a lot of Indigenous cultural facilities connected along this route. The TD Gallery of Indigenous Art, there's Native Child, there's the Huron-Wendat Trail. There's a lot of proposed cultural facilities like the Spirit Garden and the U of T Indigenous Landscape. So this is the trail overlaid with the neighborhood improvement areas, as I made reference to Northwest Toronto. So this is part of my planning area in North York. We're trying to find ways to increase active transportation, connectivity, and food production in these areas of the city of Toronto. This is just the map of the Black population, referencing the 3 areas of Jane Finch, Lawrence Heights, and Little Jamaica. We have other initiatives underway, such as our Little Jamaica study. This is an interesting map from MapTO. It's Black and Indigenous-owned businesses in GTA. And of course, there is more of a cluster in the downtown area, but connecting those businesses and supporting the business improvement areas. This is the overlay of the business improvement areas. So there are quite a few of those that are connected by this route. This is another interesting map from MapTO. It shows the existing trail system in Toronto. What I highlight is that we have, so you can see some points like the Dawn where we have junctions of trails that come together, or transfer points if you were thinking of it as a subway map. And then we have a large area in the center of the city of Toronto, which is white, which doesn't have connected trails, and it doesn't have these junction points. This is just a graphic showing some of the other City of Toronto initiatives, the Finch Hydro Corridor, the Finch LRT, upgraded streetscape, the Green Line, the Eglinton Connects upgraded streetscape, the Destination Bloor, Destination Danforth projects, which isn't added, it was the recently installed Destination Yonge, and of course the Waterfront Trail. This project is important because we have a vision. This is kind of the GTA transit map with the new routes being proposed. We've had a vision for sections of Bloor Danforth and the Yonge University line, the eastern part of the line, but really not a vision for the northwest part of the Yonge University line. We have been working on several initiatives in conjunction with this, including the expansion of Toronto Bike Share into the North York portion of the City of Toronto. So we do have it in the area along the Finch Hydro Corridor, and Councillor Pasternak's a big supporter of that. Another key statistic is that this route connects 52 city parks and many other proposed parks or secured parks through development applications. There are many cultural attractions along the Northwest Cultural Trail. So we've given an indication of these. Many of them are downtown, but what is surprising to a lot of people is there are a lot of attractions the northern end of the route in the City of Toronto. So some of those are Black Creek Pioneer Village, Casa Loma. We have City Hall, and the reason why I've included this is we have at Old City Hall the proposed Toronto Museum, which would have an Indigenous component to it, and also we have the Spirit Garden, which is proposed for Nathan Phillips Square. Another key aspect of this route is that it's intended to be programmed. So just like our cultural loops that we put guides out for throughout the City of Toronto, we want to install art, but we also want to make sure that there's programming along the route. We have been the lead. I'm not going to get into a lot of details about this in the planning department because most of the route is actually within a planning study area. We have a lot of development applications along the route. We have a lot of experience in working on cultural corridors in the City of Toronto. We're good at doing the interdepartmental and agency coordination. Most of it is all along public property, which we do coordinating with other city departments on that. And we're also working with a big central component, which is Northcrest Canada Land's redevelopment of the Bombardier property. This just gives you a graphic of where the trail sits. Most of it's within a secondary plan or along an avenue in the City of Toronto, or in a site and area specific policy area. A small section, but it's actually not in a focused planning area. This is the overlay of the avenues and some of the employment areas in the City of Toronto. This is the overlay of the recently approved site and area specific policy areas and secondary plans. There is a large study which is underway, which is the Jane Finch area up here in this area. So you can see a lot of it is actually connecting these planning initiatives through planning study areas. Some of this connectivity is already secured in existing secondary plans. So this is an example of the Downsview secondary plan. People ask me how much of the route is actually complete. You can actually walk this route through the City of Toronto right now. So in that sense, it's 100%. It's publicly accessible route. I think of it more as 85% because there are sections that are actually not paved. There are sections that are not lit. And of course, winter maintenance is an issue along some of the routes. So that's why we've got a dash line through some of it. This just gives you an idea of where what the property ownership is going through the route. Majority of it is parkland, followed by road right of way. We have some on Canada Lands property, so federal lands, Toronto community housing, school sites, and then a small section that is private with an easement. We are also thinking about access, particularly when we've done consultation on this, about nighttime routing and also winter routing. So there is a thought that because at least for right now, we don't have winter maintenance on the routes through the ravines, that we would be routing people on City of Toronto streets to get around those. So this is the Sentinel area up around York University. And then the central section uses streets that gets around the Cedarvale and Nordheimer ravines. I'm not going to talk too much about the City of Vaughan section. We have been having conversations with them. The City of Vaughan Metropolitan Center is a big growth area in the GTA. There is a culture and public art framework that has been prepared for this new downtown area of the City of Vaughan. This is a 3D representation. I'll just highlight here that as you traverse the 25 kilometers and come into the 3-kilometer section in the City of Vaughan, it's the Black Creek section you're seeing here. That is basically at the eastern end of the downtown area. There are many stakeholders, and we consider the Indigenous Affairs Office and this committee to be a key stakeholder in our consultation. We've made a lot of progress to date on this trail. Some of it's been done through development applications. Some of it's been done through initiatives such as transportation services. Our cycling section has been working on, so some of this is implemented and some of it is to come. They had a focus area around York University and the Black Creek in terms of adding connections. So one of them is the Murray Ross Parkway, which is a temporary bypass for the section through this section of Black Creek. There was another focus area in Downsview, so doing connections between the Black Creek and Canada Lands property in Downsview Park. This just gives you a sense that there are a whole bunch of other things that are along this route that are occurring to connect the route. There are other visions such as a Bay Street connectivity in terms of providing continuous cycling and adding pedestrian improvements along Bay Street. So we are working currently with Bombardier on the large 520-acre redevelopment. A part of it is also on Canada Lands property. Yorkdale has a large redevelopment, includes an Allen Greenway through their site that provides connectivity, the Jane Finch land use study, which will result in the secondary plan. There are other supporting transit initiatives such as the Jane Street bus rapid transit, the Dufferin Street bus rapid transit lines with streetscaping improvements and placemaking, Lawrence Heights revitalization, and then there was a study that was done at Sinclair West and Bathurst Street, which we now have an active development application proceeding. This is some of our initial pre-application work we've been doing up in the Downsview area, which improves connectivity to the trail system in the area. The Allen Greenway is a linear park along the Allen from Highway 401 down to Eglinton. There's an image on the lower right section that shows that linear park that is under development. Thank you very much. That is my presentation. I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you so much for your detailed presentation. As mentioned earlier, we do have one registered public speaker. So we'll pass the floor there and then we'll bring it back to the members. So I'll ask the committee secretary to confirm that our public speaker, Edith George, is ready to proceed.
Madam Chair, yes, I believe Edith George is on the call. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Edith George, to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee meeting. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, and when you're close to the end of your time, I will let you know. Please proceed.
Thank you for allowing me to speak on this item. Months ago, I deputed to this committee on the Aboriginal historical and cultural wealth of the area in the far northwest quadrant of Ward 7, where I live. One thing of value is the proposed First Nation park. This park has Section 37 money already allocated to it, and interested parties, which includes myself, can't wait for this project to begin. The park has become one of my passions. In this ward, we also have the Tarmola Park site, which is found in the northwest corner of Roundtree Mills Park, a finished park from 1927 to 1968. Canadian Olympians trained at their athletic facilities. We also have a house named Rivermead that I've brought forward for designation as heritage. The historic Toronto Carrying Place Trail is found in this ward, with the heritage red oak located in the immediate vicinity of this path. And we have 2 city leased fields at the Carmine Stefano Community Center at 3100 Weston Road that virtually sit empty from Monday to Friday. The fields are located in the vicinity of the Carrying Place Trail and the Humber River and would be perfect for for First Nation events. My area's bike trails intersect with many of the trails that Mr. Rizalski made mention of in his presentation. I support this proposed Northwest Cultural Trail coming to the far northwest corners of Toronto, which are sometimes known as the Forgotten Corners and include developing neighborhoods. I am looking forward to any questions you may have. Chimigwech.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Members, are there any questions for our public speaker? If yes, please unmute and proceed. Hearing none, I would like you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I do sort of have a question. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's a philosophical thing, but in your presentation, you've talked about routes and trails and corridors, and I'm wondering, and it's clear that there's like a vision here, right? You're gonna connect things, right? But I wonder, like, if I go down to the boardwalk, like, we know that that's a boardwalk. We know where it begins, and we know where it ends, and it's known that you walk along and you know that you're on this route or trail or corridor. That would be valuable to me. I think that would be helpful. But if when we talk about routes and
try and answer that. I live up in the northwest quadrant, been here since 1960. I have done this twice, but I have figured out without a map, sir. This was like I'm talking 15 years ago, to go to my house using these trails and bike paths all the way to Cherry Beach. Anybody can do that. And it's just absolutely beautiful. You should see a different awareness of Toronto.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I mean, appreciate the fact that you've actually done it, and that's a good thing. And to Mr. Rizalski, could you also comment on that? And could you comment on what's being done to drive community awareness of the integrated nature of these routes and corridors and trails along the entire route, so that people know that these actually exist and can do it as what Edith just said.
Before we answer that question, I would just like to confirm that there's no more questions for the public speaker, and then the members can focus their questions and comments to our presenter. So hearing none, I'd like to move on to the question being directed to Mr. Rosowski. Thank you.
Thank you, Angus, for that good question. Right now, no, you would not be able to follow the route. I have done it in the 4 seasons with different groups of people, and that is one comment that they do make. We have our parks wayfinding strategy that does provide there are some layers existing there, including that, and there are other connecting signs to things like the Huron Wendat Trail. I had one of my images was the Pan Am Path and the red line markers that went with that, and some of the maps and wayfinding that went with that initiative. So that may be something that is done eventually for this route. We're kind of at a point where we're working on knitting it together. So an overall strategy such as the Lake to Lake Trail has certain identifiers along it as well in terms of signages, in terms of wood carving, in terms of that outdoor linear art gallery that goes with the cultural component. We are hoping to add layers, which would include, of course, Indigenous placekeeping along the route that would make it like an outdoor linear art gallery or cultural experience, similar to, I gave 2 examples in the States, which you very much get that sense when you're on them, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail and the Tucson Loop Trail.
Okay, I mean, thank you for that. We own a building in the West Donlands, which we purchased right after the Pan Am Games, and I'm guessing, it's just totally a guess. I'm guessing that perhaps it's even along the path of the Pan Am path. I don't know. But if it is, I'd guess that there's virtually no awareness of the fact that it's on the Pan Am path or where the path goes or what it consists of. There's virtually no awareness of the people who actually live in that community. And I just really like, because I love the concept. I just really think it would be good, and it's not your job, I don't know whose job it is, but it'd be really good to devote resources in a sustained basis to letting people know, of the concept and how they can traverse these trails and routes. And otherwise it's just, to me, it's just kind of like a beautiful concept that doesn't actually affect people on the ground. Anyway, those are my observations.
Thank you, Francis. Please go ahead.
I just want to, I agree with Angus. Unless there's some marker or something that takes you on that invites you onto that trail. I know my husband and I were in Boston, but all the way down the streets, you follow the yellow painted line, which takes you to this place, that place, or the Boston Tea Party, and you can throw tea in the water. Or you take the green line and you go over and see the big green wall, at the Boston baseball field. Or the blue line takes you down to the maritime, the boats, the dockyard, but it takes you all the way along. And we got a pamphlet. Every hotel has these pamphlets that says the blue line does this, the red line does this, the yellow line does this. Unless you have those markers out, it looks like a sidewalk, or it looks like a path in a ravine that you don't know where you're going to. So there must, I know it's not your job to paint the signs and all, but it's certainly your job to let them know that this is what people need to utilize those pathways. There's better use of the money if you're not going to identify them as a walking path, a biking path, or something of that nature. I'd like to see more identification that would draw people to it, because I think it's a wealth of knowledge. It's great history. It's a terrific service, but only if people use it.
Thanks, Francis. I have been on the Freedom Trail in Boston, And I know exactly what you're speaking about. You can't get lost. You can't fall off that route because it's so well marked. I do think that even the Pan Am path, although there are key red lines and markers at some of the junctions with other trails, it's not a continuous red line that traces the whole route. So I still get that question when I'm on the Pan Am path. People will stop and say, am I actually on the Pan Am path? And it's been a couple of years since the Pan Am Games, so some people may not have been involved in that when it occurred. Yes, we'll take into account suggestions about distinct and prevalent marking along the route.
Thank you. Ruth had a comment.
Thank you. So thank you for actually the presentation. I found it very, interesting because I would say during the pandemic, my children's and my mental health has, sorry, I have kids, they're in the room, sorry, have really benefited from the Derry Down and Northwood Ravine System Park spaces. I agree that I had no idea that they would link anywhere other than, when we crossed Grand Ravine. That was our link. And then up into campus. I'm also a professor at York. So using the Huron-Wendat Trail is very common for us as well. In that, the signage and the engagement, I think, would be very important. But in your presentation, I noticed there was moments where I found myself disengaged because of the language being used around Indigenous people. On slide 13, I'm an academic, right? I told you that I'm an academic. I noticed we were referred to as Indigenous Canadians. And some of us, it might seem small, but for others, it's a huge point of contention that can disengage Indigenous community members to equate us with the colonial state. And so I just wanted to point that out as well, that yes, the work you're doing is very important, but when you are, and I hear that you want to create these signposts in these spaces, but when those go up, I would caution and hopefully suggest that the language is Indigenous centered instead of Indigenous included. Does that make sense? And if you're coming to the, the Aboriginal Advisory Committee, that's what we're going to say, is that Indigenous centering is very, very different than just including us or thinking that we are part of the Canadian structure. These are our territories, these ravines. There's trees in the ravines I've just spoken to that were bent and tied by our ancestors as directional pointers. These trees mean that we've been walking these ravines and these spaces since time immemorial. And those bent trees that are used as pointers to show the next community, the next generation where to walk are really important. And so if you're putting in signs, just like our ancestors put in signs, I would hope that they would be Indigenous centered. Just my thoughts. Nyauha.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the presenter? Brian?
First of all, yeah, I appreciate all of this a lot, and it did have me asking myself like where these things are, because I don't remember seeing them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I wasn't looking, but yeah, I think marking would be really effective. I also really appreciate Ruth's comments. When you have a colonial settler state that's been here, 153 years, and the rest of us have been here for thousands. It is a little nice to not have that language included. I also wanted to ask if you've been at all engaged with Carolyn King, because in Boston, you have colored lines that you follow, not unlike a hospital. but Carolyn King created the Moccasin Identifier Project.
I can answer that. I can answer that question, sir, because I have been. Okay.
Can we please mute the public speaker? Thank you. Sorry, Edith. This is Brian's time to share his comments and opinions.
Yeah, thank you, Edith. But the question is for Al. But yeah, I think that the Moccasin Identifier Project could be valuable in terms of these trails, and that is already ongoing work. And it would be interesting for something like the Huron-Wendat Trail to specifically use imagery that is in line with the Huron-Wendat culture, as opposed to a line, you know. But that's my only question and comment. Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian. I have been speaking to Sheila Boudreau, and she did mention Carolyn King, and I have not yet spoken to her. That's a great suggestion. Thank you very much.
Any more questions for our presenter? Seeing none, I will ask if there are any speakers to the item. If you do wish to speak, please raise your hand, unmute. Hearing no further speakers, I do have a motion that we want to present to the floor based on the input and feedback raised by members, and I'll have the clerks present that on the screen. Clerks, when you're ready. Thank you so much. So the motion is that, one, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee requests the Chief Planner and Executive Director of City Planning to incorporate the committee's feedback into the work of the proposed Northwest Cultural Trail. Do I have all in favor on this motion? If yes, please raise your hand. That was worded weird, sorry. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you so much. And thank you to our presenter and public speaker, Ruth.
I just want to make sure that because it's all recorded and we've all been, everything that we say is recorded, that will actually be what's taken up, the words of Angus and Francis and myself will be and of course Brian will be listened to and taken fully. That's the motion that I'm reading, is what I understood. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Thank you. And Tanya?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the comments. What I'd like to see is not just this one meeting where the comments get addressed. I'd like to have ongoing conversations so that we can continue to follow how this project is evolving, and that the appropriate people are being brought to the table, because it will also require quite a bit of research around Indigenous presencing and placemaking, recognition, language. This is a large project, and I feel that this one meeting isn't enough at this time, and it needs to be ongoing.
Okay, so do you want to see the motion amended? And if yes, can you please put it in writing to the clerks, and we can come back to it at the end. Being mindful of time, we will move on to the next item and have the motion re-shown on the screen when it is rewritten. And I am getting note that there are members that need to leave. So I will pass it over to Brian to introduce our next presenter and move us along.
Welcome, Pam. The next item is item AA13.6, use of Indigenous themed sport team names and logos in city facilities. Kevin Carr, Interim Director, Client and Business Services, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, will give a presentation to the committee. When you're ready, Mr. Carr.
Good morning. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, I think that should be showing now. Can I just get a quick confirmation? Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you for that introduction. My name is Kevin Carr. I'm the Interim Director of Client and Business Services with the Parks, Forestry, and Recreation Division. I'm pleased to share with you a proposed addition to the terms and conditions for using Parks, Forestry, and Recreation sports facilities, specifically to prohibit the use of Indigenous theme names and logos by non-Indigenous groups. So just a little background on this item. In 2019, the Ontario Human Rights Commission wrote to the mayors of 40 municipalities about the harmful impact of Indigenous-themed sports logos in city facilities and urged all municipalities in Ontario to engage Indigenous communities about the use of Indigenous-themed logos and team names in their sports arenas. So Parks, Forestry, and Recreation has followed up on both teams that the Ontario Human Rights Commission identified as being of concern. There were two teams, the High Park Braves have renamed themselves to Toronto High Park Little League, and the Willowdale Blackhawks are transitioning permanently to a new name, the Willowdale Hawks. As of July 2021, we have conducted a search of our recreation database, and we have determined that there are no Indigenous-themed names being used by non-Indigenous user groups in PFR sports facilities. So a little bit about next steps. So we are working on updating the permit application to include the following statement and to educate all staff on its use as part of ongoing Indigenous cultural competency training at the City of Toronto. So I'll just read the clause that's here. So we are proposing to add, to promote a positive and inclusive experience in City of Toronto facilities and to protect the dignity and well-being of Indigenous communities, the City of Toronto prohibits the display of any Indigenous-themed images or names by non-Indigenous user groups and discourages the display of Indigenous-themed names or images or team uniforms and personal belongings by non-Indigenous users. So in terms of how we would follow up on this, we will continue to work with the city's Indigenous Affairs Office and respond to any complaints or concerns regarding use of Indigenous-themed images or names by non-Indigenous user groups in our facilities. What we propose in terms of longer-term next steps, there was some mention by Selena of the Reconciliation Action Plan earlier in the meeting. So the City of Toronto is enacting an overarching policy on the use of Indigenous names and images as part of that Reconciliation Action Plan work. And what we further add is that we would like to consult further with Indigenous communities as part of the work of the Indigenous Affairs Office to develop that Reconciliation Action Plan. And we just like to finish off by asking your guidance on these proposed next steps and very much look forward to listening and learning from your comments and planning our next steps accordingly. Now that's the end of my presentation, so I can stop sharing the screen and open it up so that I can see faces.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Members, do you have any questions of staff on this item? If so, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Angus?
So, I understand the piece about discouraging the display of Indigenous themed names or images on team uniforms. I don't understand the piece about and personal belongings by non-Indigenous users. I understand the theory. I'm just trying to understand how you imagine, or the city imagines, it's going to be implemented in practice. So I was at the ROM on the weekend, and they've got this whale exhibit, and they've got, of course, a store where they flog all sorts of stuff. And there was baseball caps with Indigenous imagery on it, and just a ton of stuff with Indigenous imagery on it. And masks with Indigenous imagery. I bought a mask, but I bought a mask with whales because I went to the whale exhibit. I'm just trying to imagine, like, in practice, how it's going to work. Somebody walks onto a city site and they're wearing a ball cap with Indigenous imagery on it. How does this policy work in practice? The staff are empowered to say, excuse me, like, how does it work in practice? I get the stuff about the teams, but in practice, how does that last part of that motion work?
Great. Well, thank you for that question. So I think in answer to the question, really it continues to be about awareness. So by including this clause, including this language within the permits, and also the work that we're doing to communicate staff about the existence or the addition of the language, it furthers awareness to these issues and to corrective action. The second part is, by including it within the conditions on the permit application, it also gives an opportunity for, should there be a need for enforcement or for further action, that condition has been set. So that's what I would offer in response to your question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any more questions, Ruth?
When I read the slide presentation, I read that is not this sort of imagery being problematic, but the Chief Wahoo or the hat that comes in from the Washington got a new name, right? That's what I understood it as, and not as, a non-Indigenous person walking in wearing a Maxine Noel mask. You know what I mean? And I think that was the distinction, that the distinction was around the usage. When I read it, maybe I'm reading it wrong. That's what I'm asking for clarity. Is it what Angus is asking of this mask, this beautiful makwa, or is it that conversation of, somebody coming to practice wearing a Chicago Blackhawks jersey? Is that what you're kind of asking, Angus?
Well, it is, and if it's what you suggest, you understood it as, I don't think the motion is clear, or the draft clause is clear at all on that. Like, I would read it as, if a non-Indigenous person buys a ball cap with really, really legitimate Indigenous imagery on it, they walk into an arena, they're not supposed to be wearing it, and yeah, anyway, that's how I read it. So
I can read it exactly how you read it, and so that's why I'm asking for the clarity. I'm not disagreeing with you. When I go back and read it, I see what you're saying, and so that's why I'm asking for the clarity.
So that's very helpful to have that perspective on interpretation. So in answer to your question, Ruth, it's more of the latter. It's not about respectful, tasteful, if I can say, Indigenous imagery being displayed, but it's rather, more of the along the lines of the Chief Wahoo, the Blackhawks imagery and so on. So I think it's important, as I had said to the previous question, that I think this is part of a continuum, and part of continuing the conversation in terms of creating a more respectful, knowledgeable, aware environment in facilities. So that's our intention with this clause and with this language. And as I had said previously as well, to set that those kind of preset those conditions, or that basis where should we need to take action on a situation or circumstance, that ground has been set.
Thank you for that, Mr. Carr. Are there any more questions? And are there any speakers to the item? If you wish to speak, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. Seeing no further speakers, do I have a motion to receive the item? Francis? I have a motion from Francis. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and the motion carries. Just a reminder to members that we are close to quorum right now, and we only have the one item left. So if you can, please stay on for the next item so that we can complete this. On to you, Pam. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for those who are staying on past the 12 o'clock hour. So our next item is new tools for protecting local culture. Cheryl Blackman, Interim General Manager of Economic Development and Culture, is not available to deliver the presentation today. However, she has invited Elena Bird and Mariana Mota, Policy Development Officers with Economic Development and Culture, who have been leading this work, to give the presentation on her behalf. So I hand the floor over. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today about developing new city tools for protecting local culture. I'm going to share my slides. Will the clerk allow me to share content? Thank you very much. I'm going to just load the presentation now. Can I receive confirmation that you can see the presentation? Thank you. This presentation is an early step in exploring tangible ways to protect communities in areas that are meaningful to their sense of cultural identity and that have been facing urban development pressures. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. Please note that there is not a lot of Indigenous content in the deck, given that the Economic Development and Culture Division, or EDC, wanted to come to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee first for advice. During this presentation, we use the term cultural district designation as a placeholder only. Since it's commonly used in other cities that aim to accomplish similar goals. A cultural district designation does not currently exist in Toronto. We recognize the deep meaning of the word like culture or cultural to Indigenous communities. The word culture is not being used to refer to Indigenous culture. We are open to changing the term used in this work to better reflect the needs of the Indigenous communities and organizations based on learning from you. We understand also that there are no specific districts that are more or less cultural, and that every part of the city is Indigenous and meaningful to different communities. Through this work, we aim to engage with you and find ways to advance self-determination. This is the first presentation on this exploratory work to a City of Toronto Council Advisory Committee. Through this presentation, Economic Development and Culture aims to hear from you early in the process, and your advice and recommendations will be very valuable to inform next steps of this work. As will be explained later in the presentation, broad engagement is anticipated to complete this work, but in recognition that we are in Indigenous land, it is extremely important for us to meet with you first as part of this process. This presentation will consist of a brief overview of the mandate of Economic Development and Culture, background information regarding council direction, a brief explanation on the existing policy gap this work aims to address, the potential timeline for this work to be completed and what is involved in each of the two steps and two phases, an outline of findings from preliminary research, and discussion questions to inform next steps and help move the work forward. So very briefly, Economic Development and Culture Division, which is leading this work, is responsible for a broad range of activities that are led in implementation out of its 5 sections. The 4 public-facing ones are on the slide: Business Growth Services, which helps businesses maximize opportunities through a range of programs and services that target entrepreneurs, as well Film and Entertainment Industries, which supports all aspects of city film, music, tourism, and entertainment industries. Arts and Culture Services, which consults and advocates for the city's cultural industries, and as well Museums and Heritage Services, which operates 10 historic sites and leads the development and restoration of 100 city-owned cultural and heritage sites. And a 5th section, which is not illustrated in the slide, in Economic Development and Culture, is Program Support, which leads marketing, sponsorship, finance, policy development, and research in support of these 4 public-facing areas. The goal of the division is to make Toronto a place where business and culture thrive, engaging partners, encouraging Toronto cultural vibrancy, and fostering employment and investment opportunities. In January 2020, a motion by Councillor Wong Tam on protecting LGBTQ2S+ small businesses and cultural spaces was approved by Council, directing the Economic Development and Culture Division to, among other items, develop long-term recommendations to support the retention and growth of independently owned and operated LGBTQ2S small businesses and cultural spaces. And then in September 2020, in turn, a motion on supporting Black-owned and operated businesses and preserving the cultural heritage of Eglinton Avenue West, Little Jamaica, was approved by Council. The motion specifically directed EDC to work with an interdivisional team to create a Little Jamaica Cultural District Plan. It outlined that, among other factors, it should include aspects regarding delineation of a cultural zone based on local character and the existing historic business landscape, identifying and incorporating any heritage properties and legacy businesses, creating a high-profile cultural district that will enhance business and tourism, and identifying and incorporating Indigenous history within and near the cultural district. In December 2020, Jennifer Franks, consultant with Indigenous Affairs Office, gave a presentation to the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee about Indigenous placemaking. The framework for Indigenous placemaking includes expanding and ensuring presentation and commemoration of Indigenous histories and cultures, creating space physically and in the process policy for ceremony, teaching, and community, strengthening Indigenous connections with land, water, both traditionally and contemporary uses, and building capacity for land-based Indigenous engagement, as well as cultural competency for City of Toronto staff. Then, most recently in June 2021, Councillor Lake's motion directed EDC to identify policy and program options to protect Chinatown's cultural identity, affordable cultural spaces, and local retail through a cultural district plan or other mechanisms. So we also recognize the need to avoid tokenistic or simplistic identification of Indigenous history. Such recognition must be created in partnership with Indigenous communities, organizations, and knowledge keepers. As can be noted, there are common concerns and priority themes to be addressed in these areas to support communities. These include issues related to placemaking, protecting businesses, promoting tourism, protecting culture and heritage, and ensuring that Toronto continues to provide a sense of community to many groups that make the city culturally rich and diverse. Common themes call for a coordinated approach to address all these themes, and specifically the need for a more consistent, authentic, and meaningful approach to engagement on place-making projects that become clear in the Indigenous Affairs Office conversations with Indigenous communities. Protecting areas from gentrification and unaffordability, both in terms of high commercial rent and taxes, and that prevent small businesses from thriving, as well avoiding displacement and cultural erasure. Fighting loss of character, identity, and roots, ensuring safe spaces that promote a sense of belonging. Celebrating the identity of communities and showcasing their resiliency, and in addition to celebrating their history, contributing to Toronto and the neighborhoods beyond buildings, architecture, and other built features, recognizing and celebrating culture in its many various forms. So we recognize that the entirety of Toronto is Indigenous, is part of this Indigenous cultural district, and a ward-specific approach will not fully support self-determination, as Indigenous rights apply to all wards. Though we may support, in consultation with you, the support for specific projects and specific wards based on guidance from Indigenous partners. At this time, Toronto does not have an official program or coordinated approach to respond to Council's direction. So essentially, we're trying to find a way to address these gaps, seeing this reoccurring directions from councils and trying to see some of the common threads and address the gaps. We are currently exploring the feasibility and potential benefits that a cultural district designation may bring for Toronto. This strategic approach aims to protect and promote the sense of belonging of Toronto's diverse communities through a combination of tools to specifically protect businesses, cultural spaces, and heritage. This strategic approach will also reduce duplication or a series of one-offs, ensure efficient and coordinated use of city resources, and create a transparent and open process of how the city is supporting communities experiencing significant urban renewal and change. So this is a potential timeline. This slide as well lacks the Indigenous timeline. We wish to develop those in partnership with Indigenous communities and our organizations. For now, in terms of our work plan, the first step is to explore the feasibility of creating a cultural district designation and what it might look like for Toronto. Essentially, the cultural district designation is the framework for how many or various different designations might happen in Toronto. We have, since May, been working on exploring the definition of cultural districts and also what policy tools might be part of a cultural district designation. We're also working on identifying the intended outcomes. This work, which we're calling Phase 1, will be completed through a staff report to Council in October and will rely on best practices identified through a jurisdictional review, consultation with you, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee, the 2S LGBTQ Advisory Committee. They just changed their name, which is great, and community stakeholders in Chinatown. An analysis of legislation impacting the city's authority in terms of potential policy tools, and also how a cultural district designation may fit within the existing City of Toronto framework. In other words, with programs that are currently supporting businesses, built form of culture, etc. Sorry about that. I wanted to also say that once Phase 1 is complete, we intend to work on final recommendations regarding policy tools and other items outlined in Phase 1. And based on all of that, we would come back with a final report through additional consultation and engagement with the broader community expected to take place and be finalized by April 2022. So in terms of the preliminary research findings from phase one, we've learned that there are a number of cultural districts around the world. We have looked at the eligibility criteria, the factors considered in creating these geographic areas as cultural districts. We've considered application and designation processes. We've looked at policy tools that are part of cultural districts. We've done a deep dive on 9 cities that are listed here, but overall we've looked at 16 cities worldwide. An important point again is that Indigenous specific content will be developed in participation and partnership with Indigenous communities and organizations. And in terms of the jurisdictional review, we have noted to date that some cities have been proactive in embedding Indigenous history and also programming with an Indigenous focus. Some cities such as San Francisco and Minneapolis have explicitly leveraged cultural districts to advance equity and inclusion and protect LGBT and BIPOC communities. Intangible cultural heritage has been a factor in selecting areas to be cultural districts, and that community engagement has been a key element in establishing cultural districts with consultation and engagement happening at several points along the process. And the most commonly used policy tools are those that are specific for supporting businesses within the geographic boundaries of the cultural district and establishing a cultural fund to increase access to arts and culture in the district. As well, there's support for programming to celebrate and identify the area that helps support tourism. Finally, it's also important to note that research revealed that there are some policy tools that are not specific to cultural districts in other cities, but help advance the priorities noted in the motion driving this work. So 2 of those are the Legacy Business Program, which provides tax relief to meaningful businesses that have been operating for a number of years, and also loan programs to help support businesses. So that's the last slide. Thanks for listening with and sticking with me for the meeting. So we want to welcome any input, feedback, concerns, thoughts, ideas that you might have to share with us regarding what we've been working on to date. Specifically, if you have any advice or recommendation you would like to share with us about the term cultural district, or if you have an idea of what would be more appropriate for the context of Toronto. And as well, just generally advice about next steps would be really appreciated. And finally, how you would like to hear from us and how you'd like to be involved in terms of an update on this work as we go through this. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'll now stop sharing my slides.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Unfortunately, I've been informed that we have lost a member and therefore have lost quorum for this last item. So the clerks are going to perform roll call, and we will go from there. So I'll hand it over to the clerks. Thank you. And thank you to those who did manage to stay. We understand everyone's busy and that this will happen at times.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, if I call your name, please indicate you are present. Andrea Christian. Okay, sorry, Madam Chair. At this time, we have the option to wait for 15 minutes, and then I can do the roll call. We've been trying to call some members to come back just to finish the agenda. The time now is at 12:14, so I can do the roll call after 15 minutes.
So is it mandatory we wait the 15 minutes? I know we've been trying to reach out to a few members. I, however, am very mindful that we've already kept members over the time frame of the meeting and want to respect the rest of their day. So if it's not mandatory, I would likely move to proceed with the roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not actually mandatory. It's up to the committee. So I can the roll call.
I think that's preferred. Thank you so much. I'm seeing head nods, so I will go with the head nods. Thank you, clerks.
Thank you. Members, once again, if I call your name, please indicate you are present. Andrea Christian. Angus Palmer.
Present.
Blanche Miwawasage. Brian Winters.
Present.
Francis Sanderson.
I'm here.
Jeffrey Schiffer. Terry Frost.
Here.
Councillor Mike Layton. Millie Knapp. Nancy Martin. Pamela Hart.
Present.
Regina Hartwig. Ruth Colizar Green. Steve Tickens. Suzanne Brunel.
Present.
Tanya Seng.
Present.
Tracy King. Madam Chair, we only have 7 members on the call. We don't have quorum. The meeting cannot proceed. So this item will be carried forward to the next meeting of the committee.
Thank you. And with that, I would just like to, oh, sorry, Angus, go ahead.
Could I just ask that the presentation that we just had shared with us is actually sent out in advance of the next meeting? I don't think it was in this case. I didn't see it in any event. And I think it's just helpful for people to prepare so they can provide input in a meaningful fashion. So thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, we would like to invite Larry Frost to offer us a closing prayer for our meeting. Thank you, Larry.
Creator, we thank you for bringing us together today. We ask you to guide us, to continue to guide us in a positive way. We thank you for our discussions today. We're well taken, well spoken, and we honor all those people who step forward. Either be right or wrong, at least we spoke our mind with that. And Creator, we ask you to always give us good health that we can continue to do the good work we do for our communities and the good work we do for ourselves. We must love ourselves first to be able to do this good work. So I ask the Creator to guide us, give us love, and help us on our journey. So with that I say, miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Larry. Everyone, thank you for your time. I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.